Only 3 more weeks to the opening of the church for in-person services. I'm so excited to think of seeing some of you in person again. But if you've been attending online and want to continue, don't worry. We'll be streaming the live services. Good morning and welcome. You've tuned in to Sunday morning at First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We're happy to have you with us. Be well, stay safe, and come visit when you can, online or in person. But for this morning, let us begin our worship with music. Our pianist is Misha Beresnev. May we be reminded here of our highest aspiration and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. May nothing evil cross this door. That's our opening hymn. It's number 1 in our hymn book. And our hymn leader this morning is Della Purden. Our chalice lighting this morning is adapted from a Passover Haggadah, and it works very well, I think. See what you think. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve one another in the spirit of beloved community. Please join me in saying our affirmation as we do every Sunday. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. We seem to have a very loose definition of covenant at First Jefferson. The affirmation we just shared used to be called our covenant in the order of service we printed when we did in-person services. And there are small groups that meet regularly, and they're often called covenant groups even when they don't follow the practice of creating a covenant among them. We do have a written covenant that we read aloud twice a year at congregational meetings. And my thoughts today will center around how we might unlock the power of that covenant to make those words mean even more. And so my question this morning is, what does covenant mean to you? But before I attempt to answer it, let's have a story for all ages. This one's titled Sophia's Guest, and it was written by Becky Brooks. Once upon a time, there was a teacher named Sophia. Sophia had been a teacher in the town where she lived for so long that the children she first had in her class grew up and had children of their own and sent them to her class too. Nearly everyone in town knew Sophia and loved her because not only was she an excellent teacher, but she was also very kind. One day when Sophia got to work, she found a note on her desk, and the note read, "Dear Sophia, I will be around tomorrow. I wonder if I might stop by your house for tea tomorrow afternoon." And it was signed, "Your friend, God." Well, at first Sophia thought it was a joke, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that if it was a joke, it wasn't a very funny joke. And she couldn't think of anyone who would play a joke on her like that. And then she thought, ooh, what if it isn't a joke? What if God really is going to come to her house tomorrow afternoon? Sophia thought she should probably get ready just in case. So on her way home from work, she stopped by the store and she bought one of those mats that people put on their porch that says in big letters, "Welcome." And when she got home, she cleaned her house from top to bottom. She brought fresh flowers from the garden and put them in a vase in the living room. She cleaned and cleaned until everything was sparkly. And then in the morning, Sophia realized she didn't know what God liked to eat. So she baked bread, and she made a casserole and a fruit salad, and then she baked some cookies too. And what about the tea? Did God like hot tea or iced tea? She thought she'd better make both. And what if God's favorite thing in the whole world was lemonade? She thought she should probably make some of that too. She was so nervous. She didn't know what to expect. And then suddenly there was a knock at the door. Sophia's heart went pat, pat, pat. She took a big breath. She opened the door slowly. And on the other side was the mayor of the town. "Hello, Sophia. I was walking by and I smelled delicious fresh baked bread. And I thought I'd just drop by to say hello." And Sophia said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Come in, come in. I'm expecting a very important visitor who you might want to meet. Please come in and make yourself at home." So Sophia and the mayor sat, having a nice discussion, when there was another knock on the door. Sophia's heart went pat, pat, pat. She took a deep breath. She opened the door slowly. And on the other side was a group of children from her current class. "Hello, Miss Sophia. We were walking by and noticed the smell of fresh baked cookies. Do you have any extras?" And Sophia said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Come on in, come in. I'm expecting a very important visitor who you might want to meet. Please come in and help yourself to some cookies." The children were giving the mayor some much-needed advice when there was another knock on the door, and Sophia's heart went pat, pat, pat. Deep breath, open door. It was the entire Women's Covenant group from church. "Hello, Sophia. We heard the tea kettle and laughter and thought you might be having a party." Sophia said, "I'm so glad you're here. Oh, please come in, come in. I'm expecting a very important visitor who you might want to meet. Please come in and make yourself at home." And all afternoon, people stopped by Sophia's house, lured by the yummy smells and the happy sounds. The townspeople filled her house, upstairs, downstairs, and overflowed into the backyard and the front yard. And as they got hungry, they made dinner together, and they ate as the sun set and the moon rose. It was a great party. People were playing games and telling stories and baking and playing music and talking together. Sophia had such a nice time that she completely forgot about her very important guest. And even as she waved goodbye to her friends at the end of the night, she felt only contentment at having such a lovely party. In the morning, though, Sophia woke up and remembered everything, and she was confused. Whatever had happened to God? And all during her walk to work, she tried to figure out what had happened. Along the way, she smiled and waved to the people she ran into who'd been at her party, and she thought to herself that she really should do that again sometime. And when Sophia arrived at work, she was surprised to find another note on her desk. It read, "Dear Sophia, I had such a wonderful time yesterday. The bread was delicious. The cookies were divine. Tea mixed with lemonade is my very favorite thing to drink. Thank you for being such a wonderful host. I hope we can do it again soon. Love, God." Now, what do you make of that? We say God is a symbol for strength, for goodness, for wisdom, and for caring. But mostly it's a symbol for love. And from what we heard in the story, I'd say love was present at Sophia's party, from the purchase of flowers to the sharing of food and stories. Feel free to drop by this place after we open on September 12th. I guarantee love will be here. It is written that covenant is the silk that joins Unitarian Universalist congregations, communities, and individuals together in a web of interconnection. The practice of promising to walk together is the precious core of our creedless faith. That quote was the beginning of an article by Chris Cree from the Unitarian Universalist Association. There's a lot of sentiment and power in that simple sentence. Let me try to unpack it for you. First of all, as many of you know, Unitarian Universalist churches do not have creeds. You don't have to believe what I believe or what anyone else in this congregation believes to join with us on our faith journeys. We do share 7 principles which make up the covenant between our individual churches. And they include how we treat others, how we find truth and meaning in our lives, how we work for justice, and how we respect the world we live in. This covenant, or agreement between congregations, goes on to encourage each congregation to create its own covenant. And if we encourage and respect a diversity of beliefs, belief based on your own experience, life goals, and understanding of how the universe works, we have to support how we agree to disagree at times. When we say we are a covenanting faith rather than a creedal faith, this is what we mean: respect, compassion, and concern for one another amidst a dazzling display of worldviews and life goals. In their recent book, Unlocking the Power of Covenant, the Commission on Appraisal wrote, "No single concept is more central to our faith understanding than being in covenant. It is at the core of our identity. It is how we try to build and sustain the beloved community. It is the foundation of our governance structures at all levels." we have a lovely written covenant here at First Jefferson, but as I said, we read it aloud only twice a year at congregational meetings. And people who don't attend them have probably not heard it since they joined. It's read by the secretary at the beginning of the business meeting, and then, without pause, we go on to the rest of the agenda. We seldom discuss the covenant, and I think that's too bad because it is a powerful and thoughtful document. And if we had an opportunity to practice it, that is, talk about it, internalize it, live it out with awareness, why, it could affect our very lives in many positive ways and make our relationships here even more meaningful. So, I decided to start the discussion today. But I'm going to start at the end of the covenant. The closing paragraph of our covenant reads, "This covenant is a touchstone for nurturing ourselves and our church community, as well as supporting our work in the world. Through the covenant, we enrich our relationships with one another and serve others in accordance with our principles." Wow, think of that. First we talked about the silk that binds us together, and now we're talking about a touchstone, the rock with which we test the purity of gold. This is high praise for covenanting. This simply shouts, pay attention. Well, our covenant is a kind of contract, a promise to do certain things in order to nurture ourselves and our community and to support our work. In our covenant, we list 10 promises, the first 5 outlining how we will be with one another. That 5 of the 10 talk about our personal relationships with one another, I think is important. Because if we don't uphold these promises to make ourselves, strong individuals that we are, into a stronger body, we will be unable to keep the rest of the promises which deal with others. Let me just outline these and speak briefly of what I see as the ramifications of them. Ask yourself as I read them out, how well you practice all 5. Where do you see the difficulties and the rewards for you? The first promise is to promote kindness, love, and healthy relationships. I look at this as the umbrella promise. It overarches the rest. I think we practice it pretty well when we are together. Smiles when we can uncover our faces, hugs when we can give them again, and mutual listening. You know, I picture you all in this sanctuary again, and I can remember how this promise was a living practice when we were together last. The second promise is a little more demanding, to give each other support, empathy, and understanding. Now, these come from the listening to one another, doesn't it? We don't have to agree with one another to offer support, to bring forth empathy, to seek understanding. We listen because we know we will be listened to. I think we do pretty well in upholding that promise. The third promise says to be mindful and considerate in all our interactions. Well, this is one of those promises that seem easy to make, but I know that when I'm having a bad day, when I'm not feeling heard, when I'm tender from hurt I'm keeping secret, my actions, to say nothing of my interactions, are often a long way from mindful, and they are sometimes inconsiderate. Keeping this promise becomes a spiritual practice of great importance, because consider the outcomes if we don't live up to it. Promise 4 is to clarify and respect personal boundaries and feelings. Now we're getting into the great invisible territories. Personal boundaries can include how close you're willing to stand to other people, even before social distancing. And it can include how comfortable we are in asking and answering personal questions. Clarifying something before you make assumptions can be as simple as asking, "May I give you a hug?" and as difficult as watching and learning over the long haul how people react to you. And feelings? Well, we all handle our feelings differently. Clarifying can mean letting people know when they've poked a soft spot, but it can also mean letting go of minor slights and not letting them fester. The fifth promise is this: to listen to one another and seek understanding. Ask if you don't understand. Be willing to explain if you're misunderstood. Easy to say, but not always easy to practice, is it? But these things we have promised to one another. These are half of our covenant with one another. How are you doing so far? How do you think we're doing as a community? I have to admit I'm for all these promises, and I probably would give myself anywhere from a B+ to a C- in practice. But my promise to the promises is to keep trying. Let's look at the rest of the covenant when I return to the topic. But for now, here is my generosity report for this week. As we prepare to open the building for in-person services, we need help. We need you. Committees are gearing up with new plans. 3 of our paid staff have taken on new jobs or are new to the job. They need volunteer support as well as a job description and a salary. That's how churches work. We're planning on improving communications among us. We are creating new programs for our children and youth. We're seeking new members and learning new chorales. We need your generosity, your time, and your talents. Volunteer now or soon. Sing with the choir. Join in new social justice programs. Help with administrative support or physical support in continuing to make our building and grounds glisten. Here's a promise from me that isn't part of the covenant, but maybe should be. We will make volunteering fun for you, however much time you have to give. Here's a hint. Look for the job jar. I have a reading this morning from Unlocking the Power of Covenant. It goes like this. The first major function of religion is to welcome people into moral communities. For Unitarian Universalists, covenant defines both the relationship that forms around the moral core and the process of the relationship creation. Part of the power of covenant is the guidance it provides in distinguishing between behavior and individual worth. When we are all assumed to be of equal worth, it becomes possible to address behavior that appears to be out of covenant without attacking or compromising any individual's worth. The power of accountability is that we are given the space to be more honest with each other. The sharing in the relationship, the mutuality, is where the power is invested. Often Unitarian Universalists have collectively valued individualism over the interdependence of our varying lives. But covenant requires that we be present to and for one another, that we engage in community, and that we work together for the good of the entire community. It requires that we be accountable to ourselves and to each other. And we can do that when our heart is in a holy place. Please join us in singing our second hymn. It's in the Teal hymnal, number 1008, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes. and amazing grace, when our heart is in a holy place. When we tell our story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
Accountability. Now that's a challenge for our individualism, isn't it? Holding ourselves accountable. I'll have more to say about that later, but let's finish what we started. Let's look at the next 4 promises we make one another in our covenant. I started to include number 6 in the personal interactions group because its first phrase hints that it belongs there. But its support phrase has tentacles that reach out beyond the scope of each of us. Personally, I find this the most fascinating part of being a Unitarian Universalist. So it reads, to respect one another, that's the interpersonal part, and to appreciate the range of opinions among us. The range of opinions among us. We have to be doing something right when you see how large this range actually is and how well we do get along in spite of individual differences. When people ask me how this church differs from theirs or the one they used to attend, I try to tell them of this marvelous range of opinions about what faith is and means and how we practice it. I mean, just to mention that we have humanists among us, along with Buddhists, that there are Christians and Jews who worship side by side, there are atheists and agnostics, and all manner of individual beliefs. Just to mention these things causes people to say, "Ooh, how do you manage that?" And I want to say, "Very well, thank you." To me, it is what makes us all so interesting, so fascinating, so enriching, and yes, sometimes difficult and contentious. But it's worth our study and our appreciation. There follows this with promise 7, to strengthen one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Each of our range of opinions makes this search more richly rewarding and sometimes more challenging. But this is a community, I think, that enjoys a good challenge. And this leads us to promise 8, to act in the knowledge that we are part of a large and diverse world community. I think it is why people are so surprised that even with diverse opinions, we can get along in a single faith community and work to help others even more different than we. Perhaps they are not in the habit of acting as if they live in a large and diverse world community. I think acting in this knowledge means not assuming that those who don't agree with us are doing it wrong. The more we communicate with the world, the more we must realize how diverse and large it is, and the more we must realize that we can get along even with our differences. And Promise 9 finally gets around to naming the work we need to do to be a vital and sustaining faith community. When we have taken care of our own community relationships, then we have the strength and courage it takes to work toward equity, justice, and compassion in all relations. Equity, justice, and compassion. 3 little words with huge rewards and impacts. 3 little words on whose meanings we could easily spend the rest of our lives and only begin to scratch the surface of their meaning and impact. Now, I know this is a lot to take in, isn't it? This is a lot to think about. No wonder we listen in stunned silence when this covenant is read in May and November, and then go on with the business of the congregation as if electing board members and balancing budgets is the real work of our faith. It is important, but is simply laying the groundwork for the rest. But I haven't gotten to number 10 yet. It is the structure on which the rest are balanced. It is the power and the magic of covenanting itself. But before we go there, let us take a moment to look in on the congregation that has been dispersed and separated for the last 17 months as we review the communion of names and milestones. Remember at the beginning of today's service, I said there is a covenant between and among congregations? It is how we create a world faith community without demanding conformity. And part of that covenant is that while you may belong to an individual congregation, you are welcome in any, and welcome to reach out to any. This past week, I got a telephone call from a woman I'll call Amy, who is a member of the College Station Unitarian Universalist congregation. She was stranded here for a few days, and she shared the problems that she had been living, which included illness, depression, a bad relationship, a loss of property. She was having more than a bad day, and what she wanted was someone to talk to and someone to have her in their thoughts. She shared with me a dream she was working toward that included worldwide service in the area of equity, justice, and compassion in Gambia. Her physical presence with an organization she is working with there. And she asked for my prayers. And she asked me to ask you, to ask this congregation to pray for her in the coming days as well. So, however you reach out to the universe, will you keep Amy in mind this week? You don't know her, we may never meet her, but will you pray for, wish for, hope for her recovery, her return home, and the realization of her beautiful dream? Let us take a moment to share the silence and compose that prayer for Amy and for all of those who are within the realm of this beloved community. Let us meditate together. In Chapter 2 of Unlocking the Power of Covenant, the Commission on Appraisal wrote about the nature of covenant, explaining it like this. The term covenant is of Latin origin, meaning to go with. It presupposes two or more parties who come together to make a contract or a binding agreement, including promises, stipulations, privileges, and responsibilities. It is used differently in different contexts. In political situations, it can be translated as a treaty. In a social setting, it may mean a lifelong friendship agreement, or it can refer to a marriage. It is even used to describe the binding agreement of a homeowners association about such matters as architectural restrictions and landscaping guidelines. In religious and theological circles, there has not been agreement on precisely what is to be understood. You see, in the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible, the covenants mentioned were often individuals' covenants with God. And different religious traditions have differing concepts of where authority lies and the levels of authority. But for Unitarian Universalists, authority lies within the community, not in some external location. So that's one definition. Additionally, a covenant differs from a contract in the understanding of what happens when it is broken. For instance, I have a contract with you for outlining both of our responsibilities. And my responsibilities include how often I preach, what committees I meet with, what I do outside the pulpit, and how I'm to behave as a representative of the church. And your responsibilities as an organization include how I will be paid, what kind of support I'm given, who I supervise, and where I work. And there is a section of the contract that outlines how we might break it. If either of us does so, or when its ending date arrives, the contract is over. It's finished. It's the end of our agreement. We go our separate ways. But our covenant is different. Because when it is broken, there is a provision for its renewal. Our covenant puts it this way in promise number 10. To practice forgiveness for ourselves and others, so that when we fail to keep this covenant, and that means any of the 10 promises, we can begin again in love. Covenants have incredible power because of their forgiveness clause. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. How do we do that if the covenant is broken? Well, we have built in the process. We have a committee on ministry that looks at the shared ministry of this congregation, how and where and why we minister to one another and to the world. And if you, as an individual, feel that any part of our covenant has been broken, yours with me or with one another, you can contact the Committee on Ministry and the process will begin. If conflict resolution is necessary, the committee will help the board put together a team to begin healing it. If discussion is needed, it will be put into process to talk among those who feel it necessary, with a mediator or without one. And if you need to tell me I'm not ministering to you sufficiently and can't bring yourself to speak to me on your own behalf, the committee, also known as the COM for its initials, will help you get the message to me or to anyone else who has fallen out of covenant. The contract is never broken in a covenant until every step for resolution and forgiveness has been taken. You see, it begins with kindness, love, and healthy relationships, and it ends. No, it doesn't end. It continues unbroken with forgiveness and starting over. That's its power. That's the power of Unitarian Universalism with our faith. I began this discussion by reading the end of the covenant to you, but there is one more sentence I didn't read. And it reads, we pledge to revisit and renew this covenant, to sustain the vitality of our congregation in our ongoing quest for spiritual growth. I have an idea I would like to propose to you. Do you remember at the beginning of the year how we celebrated Chalaka by having individuals say how each of our 7 principles was important to them? I would like to do the same with our relational covenant. I would like you to read it and to choose, if you would like to participate, to say how one of its promises speaks to you. I can only imagine how powerful this covenant can be if it is heard in that range of opinions among us, if it is acknowledged as part of a large and diverse world community, if it is appreciated as we clarify and respect our personal boundaries and feelings. You can find our covenant on our website. Let me know if you want to participate beginning after our opening service next month. And if I don't hear from you, I might just be giving you a call. In the meantime, let us celebrate the circle of community that the covenant assures us with our closing hymn number 323, Break Not the Circle.
Break not the circle of enabling love, where people grow forgiven and forgiving. Break not that circle, make it wider still, till it includes and embraces all the living. Come wonder at this love that comes to life, where words of freedom are with humor spoken, and people keep no score of wrong and guilt, but will that human bonds remain unbroken. Join then the movement of the love that frees, till people of whatever race or nation will truly be themselves, stand on their feet, see eye to eye with laughter and elation.
Our chalice has burned this morning. It was lit to promise to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to live in the covenant of the beloved community. And if we take this promise into our own hearts, then we can extinguish the chalice that burns before us until we meet again. Our benediction this morning was written by Burton D. Carley. Cheered by our community, blessed by our covenant, uplifted in mind and renewed in spirit, go forth with courage and in peace to meet the day to come. So may it be with all our lives.